student studying clinical mental health counseling at Liberty University. And I am together with a group of students who are all international, and they'll be introducing themselves in a short while. And our presentation today is about counseling international students during the COVID-19 pandemic. So before we begin, I would just like to open the floor to my fellow presenters just to go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we'll go on from here.
So my name is Deepa. I'm a grad student of Liberty University, studying clinical mental health counseling.
Good morning. Good to see you, everyone. My name is Jinok. I graduated from Liberty University in 2019, and I am currently a resident in marriage and family therapy. I'm going to start the PhD program at James Madison University this summer.
Good morning. I'm Deepa Emmanual. I graduated with my master's in clinical mental health counseling in 2017 from Liberty, and I'm hoping to start the PhD program this fall. And I'm back in India right now.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm Dr. Joy Mwendwa. I'm an associate professor at Liberty University. I am delighted to be working with this amazing team, and thank you all for making time to be with us this morning. And we're looking forward to our time together.
Thank you, everyone. And I just want to recognize one outstanding team member. You can see her name listed on there. Her name is Lina Ramirez. She was part of this project, and unfortunately she couldn't be here with us today, but we just want to recognize that she was part of the team, and she helped us with this project. So if you can help me, Dr. Joy, just to talk a little bit about the learning objectives that we have for this presentation today. The three things that we want to talk about include some of the background, the current statistics and anecdotes on international students in the United States. And the second thing is just to discuss the challenges that this group of students are facing specifically because of COVID-19, obviously using the current literature and some of the case studies that we will be presenting. And then lastly, to talk about ethical and legal considerations when working with this population. Now, just one of the overarching goals for this presentation is for you to walk away with at least this idea in your mind that these statistics represent individuals, just like the people that you see in this presentation today. I'm sure you can tell that this is a very diverse group of international students. And so the numbers do not just tell stories about people who were out there, but these are actually some of our stories and some of the stories of people that you may have worked with in different settings in higher education or in practice. And so that's just the big overarching goal that we would like for you to consider as you engage in this presentation. So when it comes to acculturative stress, studies have shown that international students are prone to struggle with mental health affectations. They present with difficulties navigating in the host country's medical systems, and they tend to be less motivated to seek counseling services. Now, you have to keep in mind that this is pre-pandemic. So some of these issues, these acculturative stresses that will be mentioned in the few slides that will come after, they've been existing for a while. And so what's happening is COVID-19 has significantly increased their risk factors and hindered some of their protective factors. So even when these students initially struggled with some of the stresses being in a host country, as you all are aware, COVID-19 has made it just more challenging even to rely on some of those things that were helping them go and stay in school and do well. And so that's what we'll be looking at today. So next slide, Dr. Joy. So we just want to give you a brief highlight of some of the international student enrollment trends. And as you can see from the first bullet, in 2019, international students made up 5.5% of the total US higher education. So this was about a little over 1.9 million international students. And then there was a 2% decrease in international students enrollment from the 2018-2019 academic year to the 2019-2020 academic year. Now, this has actually been a trend where the enrollment has been decreasing for at least the past 4 years since 2019. So going back to around 2015, 2016 academic year. And some of the countries with the highest enrollment are China, with about 369, 548,000 international students, India, and we do have someone who's represented here from India, and South Korea. And then in fall of 2020, so this is where a lot of things changed, and approximately 50% of the institutions reported a decrease in the international applications since the beginning of the pandemic. And so this is just specifically those students who were enrolling for the first time to start their studies. So that's a very significant decrease. However, this still means that there were people who were currently enrolled in the programs. Then there's a total number of international students enrolled physically, decreased by 16%, and then enrollment of first-time international students decreased by about 43%. So that's just a broad overview of the current statistics. And here I just have a graph that shows you the countries, the students represented by countries, and we have China at the top of the list, and then going down all the way to Bangladesh with about 8,249 students. But as you can see, even from the group that's presenting here, this is not a complete list. There are people from other countries, and it's important, again, I just would like to emphasize that these are just numbers, but these are the faces. And these are the people, these are the stories that we'll be talking about when we do this presentation. So before I just invite my colleague to talk about some of the challenges that these students experience, I would like for you to think about this biopsychosocial spiritual model, which we'll use to kind of touch on some of those experiences and challenges that these students have experienced. And my colleague Deepa will take it from here, and she will break down some of those challenges that these students have experienced.
Thank you, Daniel. Good morning again. I will be covering the biological and psychological factors that make this already vulnerable group even more vulnerable during this ongoing pandemic. This pandemic has affected people from all different walks of life in different ways. International students are one such group of people who have been affected, but they haven't received much attention. As shown earlier, the majority of the international students are from Asia, mostly from India and China. And according to the statistics released by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color are disproportionately affected by COVID-19. In addition, the CDC has also reported that Black and Asian people are at particular risk for contracting the disease and have greater mortality and intensive care needs. Not only are they at a greater risk for contracting the disease and for being adversely affected by it, but knowing that they are at a greater risk puts, and knowing that they may not have the support that they need if they fall sick and that they may not have the resources required, places a significant psychological burden on them. Like many college students, most of these international students, this is their first time away from home and their families. However, international students have a greater burden since they have to move and adjust to a new country and adjust to a completely different culture. Additionally, they may not have the support or be able to go home if and when they require. I remember when my mother felt really ill, I was not able to leave immediately, though she was hospitalized and she was in the ICU for a month. This was a great stress on me because if I had to leave, I would have had to retake the entire semester, which was not only a financial burden, but would have set me back in my course. So apart from the academic stress and the personal stress and the financial stress, it was just a significant amount of burden. And just not having, though I was a mental health professional in the making, there was still difficulty for me to address this and talk to people about this. And so though local students may face similar challenges, being far away from home exacerbates the stress and anxiety. And though there have not been any particular studies examining the changes in international students' mental health after the onset of the pandemic, studies have found that the pandemic has affected people's mental health just across the population. According to the CDC, the prevalence of symptoms of anxiety disorders is thrice of what it was in the second quarter of 2019, and the prevalence of depressive disorders is approximately 4 times what it was in the second quarter of 2019. Furthermore, studies have found that students have been affected in a similar manner. A study of 8,400 French students, which is reportedly one of the largest studies in this area, has found that they had high levels of stress and anxiety after the onset of the pandemic. The study was done in an area in France which was one of the worst hit, and they had a lot of government restrictions. The researchers also reported that there were signs that this confinement and isolation may lead to the development of PTSD. Another study by Sun et al. Found that of the 195 students who participated in this study, 138 students, which is approximately 3/4, reported that they had anxiety and stress, and it had increased due to the pandemic. And previous studies have reported that international students' mental health that international students face mental health issues even under regular circumstances. Sawyer et al. In 2008 interviewed 200 international students, of which 130 participants reported that they experienced isolation and or loneliness. In a similar manner, Guilherme et al.'s 2009 study reported that that a significant portion of the international students that they interviewed had experienced loneliness and isolation. Given the restrictions and lockdown in many parts of the country and the world in an attempt to curb the disease, it is safe to assume that that their isolation and loneliness has only increased. Apart from the isolation and loneliness, they're faced with many uncertainties regarding both their personal and academic lives. Personally, I know of 3 people who were not able to visit their parents when they were sick, nor make it to their funerals due to travel restrictions. And one person who's an only child and the only son was able to reach India, but was stuck in quarantine 2 hours away and was only able to make it to his home city 2 hours after his father passed away, which given the cultural background, it was very stressful for him being the only son and child. And they don't have especially when they're not able to make it to the funerals, they weren't able to have closure, nor were they able to share or grieve with their loved ones, which affects their mental health even further. However, despite being such a vulnerable group and facing such mental health problems, it is reported that international students are less likely to seek help. A lot of this stems from stigma and other social factors. Now my colleague Jinok will discuss more of the social aspects.
Thank you, Deepa. So I will be covering social challenges that international students face during the pandemic. So first one is adjustment to virtual learning, and then lack of social support from school, community, or church because they are closed due to pandemic, and then social exclusion and xenophobia. So we will look into adjustment to virtual learning first. International students face challenges to adjust to the host country and the new education system in remote or online scenarios, which is more difficult experience than in person. In addition, there is information overload phenomena. International students attempt to keep up with the latest information from the host country and the home country. And this phenomena perpetuates anxiety and reduces information-seeking behavior because more information can create confusion and preoccupation instead of alleviating concerns. For example, so international students find contrary information in regards to COVID-19 restrictions, health and safety protocols, and practices. So they may find one narrative in the home country and another one in host country. Actually, this is my story because I'm from South Korea. And so I always check two newses, what is going on in my country, and then how things are going on in the United States. Obviously, a lot of restrictions and then vaccination or a lot of the difference between two countries. Next, we will discuss the increased hate crime toward Asian American during the pandemic. The analysis released by the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University revealed that while hate crimes in 2020 decreased overall by 7%, those targeting Asian people rose by nearly 150%. So according to the Stop Asian American Pacific Islander Hate Report, 3 out of 10 Asian Americans report having experienced racial slur or racist jokes since the beginning of the pandemic. Types of the discrimination include verbal harassment was so huge, 68%, and then next one is shunning, 20%, physical assault, 11%, and civil rights violations like workplace discrimination, refusal of service, and being barred from transportation was 8%. And then last one is online harassment, which is 6%. Chinese groups are the largest ethnic group that report experiencing hate, followed by Koreans, Vietnamese, and Filipinos. And women report hate incident 2.3 times more than men. So for example, some Asian students reported that people are shouting at me on the bus saying Corona is my fault. And some other examples from my own friends here in the United States are going back to your country or being called China virus. So these trends worsen Asian international student social isolations and exclusion. Next, my colleague Bose will covering the financial stressors.
Thank you, Junior. We covered the financial part of the social challenges that international students have in the United States. Survey shows that international student funding contributed 38 billion to U.S. economy in 2019 to 2020 academic year, and the loss of $700 million due to COVID at that fall of 2020 is an evidence that these foreign students' finances are greatly affected by COVID-19 pandemic. During the COVID-19, most international students have shown to report reduced loss of family and personal funds. The exchange rate of most of the foreign countries are now very high. So changing for example, as at last year, it was 30% increase in my home country's rate of exchange rates to change money to dollars. So many people, there was a particular graduate student that was my colleague that was sponsoring himself. He had to he complained of amount budgeted and he could not make that amount again. So he had to drop out of school and returned back to his home country because they could not pay his fees for last semester. So reduced, and most of the foreign government grants or finances, most students complain that the fund is not readily available anymore for international students. So we have great challenges. I've made almost all the international students to have great challenges with housing, with feeding, and then with tuition. We all know that US education is an expensive endeavor for foreign students because the students are not eligible for financial aid program through the US government. There are some additional fees that have been added to international students' tuition, like we have to pay the medical insurance, is compulsory every year for us to pay. And then the scholarship from the US government are limited. Most international students don't enjoy the scholarship from the US government. As shown in the chart, 54% of international students get their funding by their family and their personal funding. Business, which may be from their parents, it might be from their uncles or aunties. Some people get funded from their churches or from their community. So 4% of the foreign government only help students, international students, with their funding. And then some of them have to do some get employment in the US for them to get. So 40% of them get employment in the US to fund themselves, while 54% have personal and family funding. So as counselors, we have to look at the challenges that the impact of COVID-19 has been on the students. It has reduced and they have loss of their finances, and it's impacting international students, most of them, their mental health, and then we need to provide necessary support for them to have a better living. Another challenge that the international students have is they have challenges that give them challenges with the travels and visas. In addition, COVID-19 pandemic has impacted most of international students, with some unable to travel to their home country, some of them due to travel restrictions, travel ban to and from their countries, embassies and consulates being closed and not having clear opening days, sudden and recurrent changes in visa requirements and migration policies and school protocols. Last year, there was a particular guy that was in my department. He's been in the US for like 2 years and he has not seen his wife. So last year he opted out to get his wife to get the F2 visa and come join him. Unfortunately, the wife was about going for the interview, but the embassy was closed, so the woman could not get the visa. The man slipped into depression, and for like a year, up till now, the wife has not been able to come join his husband in the US. These are some of the challenges that international students face in the US. Trying to connect with their families. The pandemic has really worsened it, so most people cannot travel because of that. Although we have the students might maintain their status. It is important for students, international students, to maintain their status, and they are given the opportunities to bring their spouses here. But some of the sudden change and all the changes and the recurrent changes in visa requirements has made most of them unable to bring their family to join them here. And this is a great stress on them. Knowledge about the student immigration status as counselors and their family dynamics will help us as counselors to give the client the necessary support that he or she might need in the future. We want to talk about the grief and loss and how the international students handle all this in the United States. Understanding grief with an international student cultural context is very important. But some students can either come from the collectivist or individualistic culture. I come from the collectivist culture from Africa, and where we put so much importance into how we do the burial if you have lost someone. And so understanding the client's cultural rituals will help counselors to give necessary support to them to process and to express their grief. And for some international students, attending religious centers and communities will have been a way to process their grief last year. but closures of religious centers has greatly affected them. Last year, most of the religious centers were closed, and so most people could not, relate and connect with their people from the same culture. They come to the same religious center. There was a boy last year that lost his father, and it's in their culture that they have to be at the funeral as the firstborn of the family. Unfortunately, this boy could not go back to his own country, which is Nigeria. He couldn't go back to his own country for the funeral. And the boy could not even grieve. There was no grief process for him. He's depressed, and presently he's been hospitalized because he could not go. So that shows that rituals offer people ways to process and express their grief. If we're not given the opportunity to, because of the pandemic, many people could not travel, and because of lack of funds, this boy could not even go out of the country because there was no even money for him to travel, and he lost his father, and they had to bury his father immediately because the man died of COVID. So many things are some of the challenges that international students face in the United States, and these challenges we need to, like, if you have any client that comes to us, we need to want to look at that and see how we can render our help and give them support, because we know that international students go through a lot of challenges in the United States of America. So next is how we're going to meet all these students and how we're going to give our help to give them the support that we need. So the next one is for my professor, Dr. Joy, will explain some of the things we have to do to support this special group of population in the United States.
Thank you, Bose. Before we jump into our last portion, which will highlight our third objective, where we want to talk about how the strategies we can use as counselors and also in the counselor educator part to help and to work with this population, I wanted to maybe check in with the rest of those who are in attendance to see if you have, whether directly with the folks that you work with or the people in the community, if you've seen some of the things that we've already shared and or you've seen additional pieces that maybe you can add into this conversation. So again, the question here being, what are some of your experiences, again, directly or indirectly, of the international students that you've worked with? How have they been impacted by COVID? Feel free to put that in the chat, and or we have a smaller group if you want to unmute as well, that would work, or put it in the chat and we'll try and have a conversation about that. And as we're, go ahead. Sorry, I don't know if I heard somebody was going to share, but Jay, to respond to your question from earlier, yeah, we can certainly share the material. Anyone maybe to add or comment regarding what they've seen with working with this population? So Brooke, so you've heard how challenging it's been for them to navigate and being forced to leave campus or go home, and they don't even know where they're going. Exactly, that's been one of the things that's been, I mean, talk about anxiety provoking, particularly earlier when this started. Some of them, the schools closed, they couldn't stay on campus, but they didn't have people to go to. Very, very overwhelming. Thank you for sharing that. Exactly. So Ariam, thank you. So similar issues with students at our university here in South Africa. Yes. So this is really across the board if you think about it. Here are people who they're here to study, but this pandemic has hit all of us, certainly as a world, but definitely have some added nuances to their situation. Yes, Lindsay. So many changes in addition to the innate challenges of the time difference, right? Lack of availability of resources. So Lindsay, to your point, I have one of our students who had to go back home and then a different part of the world. And so when we do Zoom or WebEx in for class, they're having to wake up at a different time, but sometimes internet or electricity isn't available. And so even those resources can be a hindrance. Yes, uncertainties regarding lockdown. You don't know. I mean, whether it's impacting your travel. My family had to travel for a funeral, and we were literally standing outside Washington, D.C., ready to leave. And something came from Amsterdam. They couldn't travel. And so they were stuck here. Yes. So there's so much that's changing. So Jay, yes, they have at least face-to-face. Oh, that's a really good point. So yes, you bring up a really good point. So international students, to stay legal, have to maintain this face-to-face interaction. They have to be in a residential class. So whilst many governors or other universities have made adjustments, there's still that required number of courses that you have to be in. So sometimes we've almost, I wonder if this is a conversation with administration. We're requiring them to still pay the same amount, to still be the same classes, pay the same amount of money. This has impacted all of us. So how do those funds still come and support somebody here? Excellent point. Oh, yes, Brooke, a really good point. So right now, international students not being able to access the COVID vaccine, they're not eligible in the same way. I think that just hits home for me. I just happened to got my shot yesterday. I'm in the state of Virginia, and that was recently opened up for everybody. And we were trying to call, I happen to be a faculty liaison for the international student community here in just my mini campus, and we tried to call other people to see, hey, they had extra shots at this one site, but what happens with the people that I don't know or who can't get access to that? Exactly. So Brooke, again, that just travel piece. Do you have to be vaccinated at that time? What if you don't have that on time, etc.? My colleagues, are there any other responses maybe to some things that have been shared on here that you wanted to add?
There's one more that's just come up about conflicting feelings with choosing to return home without a degree and feeling like a failure of staying and feeling isolated. It sounds like being caught in this a rock and a hard place where, and for a lot of international students coming over to study in the US, I think it carries a lot of responsibility, a lot of weight. Being there, for some people, it's a literal village affair. And so thinking about returning home without a degree or staying here and feeling isolated is really, it hits home. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And just one more thing that someone had pointed about the time difference. We do actually have one member in this presentation who is probably in the evening now. Deepa, if you can share.
It's about 7 p.m. right now, which is, it's not too bad, but it was just a little confusing while working on the presentation together because it's a day for them and I'm asleep, and when they're asleep I have to figure out between work and trying to just work out the presentation. So it's just trying to coordinate everything has been difficult. So I can only imagine how much more difficult it'll be for students who actually have to attend classes and meet deadlines and all of that on a regular basis and not just for a presentation. And yeah. So their sleep cycle will be off. And I have a cousin who's not a student, but he was working for JP Morgan, and he had to come back during this pandemic. And so he works on their time zone, but he's living here. So he doesn't get to see anyone because he wakes up in the middle of the night and he goes to sleep early in the morning. So he doesn't get to socialize or even see much of anybody else. And I know how difficult that has been. So I can imagine the added stress that it would be for a student having to do all the academic work and trying to just maintain a life outside that.
Thank you, Deepa, for sharing that. And Lindsay, yes, to your point, when we recently had daylight saving, you're calling the other people that you'd already kind of come into a system, but then the folks who are out on the other side of the world are having to readjust their life, tell their family. I mean, there's so much that's connected to that. And thank you all so much for that conversation. Well, let's talk about a little bit, as I share my screen here, how then do we work with this group of people? I think on many levels, we have to think about how we can really tailor our care for this population. Some of the things that we've already kind of talked about and hinted on are some basics that, you know, even this team was just kind of thinking. And I just want to shout out to each of them for their hard work and just being able to put this together. But show empathy and compassion. The reality is we don't fully understand what they're going through, but it goes such a long way to be kind, to withhold judgment, and then the fact that we are aware that they are vulnerable, especially around this time. How can we be flexible? And some of this is not just at the counselor level, but maybe that advocacy, which I'll talk about later here, that might be advocating for them at the administrative level, at the university level. What are the needs that they have? And working specifically with this group of people, encouraging them, if it's a client, to limit social media, or at least have a conversation about how they are to engage with that. Both of you were talking about how you watch different news, or maybe it was, I think multiple of us might have touched on this, Jinok, you're watching South Korean news and then you're watching American news. And that's the story of my life as well. I was born here, but I have Kenyan parents, I have friends all over the world. You're constantly having to go to different sources to find out what's going on. But, you know, let's have a conversation about, or at least invite them to think through and process and reflect on how is that impacting them? And at the same time, they still have to stay, you know, informed. So what is a good plan for them? Let's have that conversation with them. Let's attend to their basic needs. Several years ago, so this is outside pre-pandemic, I was working with a group of students, and I've run into an international student on the hall. And I remember I think he had been there several weeks, and I asked him how school was going, whether he had located the Graduate Writing Center. And then for some reason, I don't know where this came from, but I remember just asking, you know, if he had food. And he didn't respond, and he was quiet. And he was older than me, but his next response when he did say something, he just said, "Mama," like mom, like, which I'm way younger than he, you know, I was younger than him, but just the sign of respect to say, "Mama, I need help here." He didn't even articulate that, but I remember just thinking to myself, I know, you know, on a program level, we've done certain things for certain people, but sometimes it's that conversation that can mean such a, you know, make a difference in their life. And we were able to organize for them to get what they needed in terms of food. But just because they're here, and yes, we are saying they've checked off paperwork, but what's happening right now? What is it that they need? You think about the winter, we just kind of passed, but if they just got here, it's the fall, they've never experienced a winter. Do they have what clothing, a coat, etc.? So, but provide for those basic needs. Just a couple other things. Studies have shown that peering wellness programs really work with this population. Earlier, Daniel had talked about how this population isn't always open. There's a lot of stigma to counseling. And so trying to see what works. So what has worked well and has been discussed is peering. So let them have conversations. put them together in groups. It's worked really phenomenally recently. I know of a team who has this, is in a group chat. No, it's a WhatsApp group, and they'll kind of check in on with each other. They're able to discuss different things. And even within that, the others who have gotten help can help the other people get help. Okay. Let me go to that third bullet. Use cultural metaphors and stories. There's something powerful about, again, realizing that the world is so big, and there are certainly different epistemologies and worldview, etc. For us as counselors who are here, it strengthens the therapeutic alliance when I'm able to use something that will relate to them, right? We are encouraged to tailor our treatment to suit them. And one of those is using metaphors and stories. I've found myself, I mean, I have that background, but sometimes I'll pull stories and they're like, sometimes they're kids' stories, but sometimes when psychodrama works really powerfully, there's something hidden that somebody can kind of still connect to. So with this one, many times I'll even ask them, I'll have the client, or when I'm doing group counseling with this population, since they're their own expert, I will invite them to share in their language if they have to. There's certain elements, I think, in a counseling relationship where if this individual in counseling needs to share and use their own mother tongue, their heart language, then let them do that. The counseling is about them, not about me. And then as a counselor, they'll translate what they need to translate for me. English is my third language, and I can say there are certain things when I speak with my heart language that I Kimwata differently, like it responds differently in my heart. And so welcome and invite your clients to do so if that's needed. For all of us, just continuing to grow in our own global awareness. So what does it look like for you just to understand, you know, Deepa, the fact that here we've engaged with you, you're in a different part of the world. Let's talk about timing. Or if there's a typhoon that's happened, at least if I know where that country is, will I check in with my client because I'm aware that they're in a different part of the world. One here, this is a really practical strategy to consider, is for counselor educator departments to have access to an immigration lawyer. So depending on the size of your university, you as a department might not actually have direct access to the lawyers of the university, but what if you could contract a lawyer? So we're not saying, you know, we need to understand immigration law, but could we have access to an immigration lawyer? Contract them out, because there are legal pieces and elements that the student needs, and for them to have access to that is something that we can provide, at least consider. I'd mentioned this earlier, the client is their expert of their culture, and so have them own that space. Let them define certain things from their perspective as opposed to my perspective. Utilizing strength-based versus deficit-oriented approaches. You think about it, we are sitting in a counseling office, I'm gonna bring up language again, and the fact that I am talking with an individual who knows several languages. I mean, even just the mere fact of just acknowledging, wow, you've had to learn another language so you can hit the markers of the academic expectations, or you're here by yourself, you've left your family. Are we recognizing, are we praising, are we celebrating the accomplishments that they have and that they continue to hit by the mere fact of continuing to be here? How can we expand this discussion, and how can we continue to support this research? I encourage all of us, particularly those who are in counselor education, to advocate for funding, to encourage your students to present or to research on this topic. if I could, even just for the folks who've hosted us, we're so grateful for this opportunity and this chance to be able to present. Here we are, just the 5 of us, and the very fact that we had to even meet for this and prepare for this has been not just encouraging, but it's helped us to grow professionally. So it's an event just like this that can help research and the expansion of this discussion. As we know right now, particularly going back to the pandemic, there's very limited research on this topic. And so ongoing research needs to be done. We talked a lot about grief at different times. It's so complex. I mean, you think about the sheer numbers of how much life has been lost in this pandemic. And then you add this layer of this population and what the needs that come with that. 100%, I hope we can continue to do research so we can understand. I mean, I think as a world and as a country, there's going to be need for research surrounding grief as we move forward, but especially let's not forget this population as we are seeking funding and having conversation for that. Last but not least, I mentioned earlier, advocacy. One way to do that is to identify in a department, if possible, if there can be a faculty who specifically works with this population. From KCREP standards will require that there's faculty advising for our students across the board. And that in itself is super helpful. And this would just be an added layer. So again, I'm a faculty liaison for a department, and ever so often I'll send emails just to check in with students, or we'll celebrate who is getting into a PhD program, or we'll, since when we hear about a scholarship or something that comes through that would impact or would be for this population, I'm able to forward that on to them. Maybe just a consideration. Sometimes when we take this on, if the administrators who happen to be on this call, think about the faculty member who says yes to this volunteering aspect. How can you support this faculty member to maybe even get release time? I'm not complaining, y'all, but it's a reality, right? It's a reality of we'll take on, because I love to work with this population, but as an administrator, how can you support this faculty who's working with this population? And that could apply in so many other areas, but thinking of your role and what part you could play in this becomes important. All right, well, at this point, would like to open it up again to just hear specifically, what are some things, maybe the questions or comments, and specifically in light of COVID, what are other things that we could, as counselors or counselor educators or administrators who are connected with counseling, what are some things that we can do to specifically work with this population? And whether for my colleagues and certainly for the folks who are present with us.
Just highlighting what Dr. Joy had already mentioned, I think there were times of the program where I was struggling just adjusting to though I had done my undergrad in America too, just adjusting to the new city and the program and just personal issues. It was difficult adjusting, and there were points where I was considering leaving the program, but she had reached out to me, and that just gave me a sense of, okay, I have some support, I have someone I can reach out to, because coming from a culture where, like in an Indian culture where there's still so much stigma, though there isn't personally per se from my family, just in the culture, there's still so much stigma about mental health and just reaching out and just inhibitions related to that. So just having her reach out to me helped me understand and respond to that. And instead of someone waiting to hear from the students, sometimes just reaching out to them makes such a big difference.
Yeah, you all have lots of thank yous in the chat coming in. As the room monitor, I love being in these sessions that I get to learn and and kind of transfer these questions. I think one of the biggest takeaways that I noted was kind of having like a bank of knowledge and resources that you can give, because it's such a wide range, but the things like within your facility or within the school or within the program, like having a true kind of bank of those resources, I think would be really imperative to being supportive and just knowing how you can reach out and immediately give information instead of just reaching out and having no idea what to give.
That's an excellent point, Lindsay. You know, one of the things that myself and a few of our colleagues in the fall for faculty orientation, we are preparing to do something similar, just kind of this presentation, but to all our faculty, just to have them learn more about the students that they'll be working with. And to your point, let's see something here about virtual support groups. On a personal note, I mean, I live in Central Virginia, so many of you wouldn't know this, but yes, I'm running a private practice, a small one, but that's one of the goals just a semester in the fall to start to do that. But I mean, I even was Googling around just to see if there were many, and I sadly, that hasn't been the case. And so thank you even for that just really encouraged me to continue with that. And Deepa, I appreciated you sharing that, just the importance of us being able to reach out to our students. Any other comments? And thank you all. Comments or questions?
So in addition to what Dr. Joy just told us, peer pairing, I think, is an important part that we can work on. I can remember when I started this program in 2018, I was all alone in this program. I didn't know anybody. I was the only African lady in my class. So I was doing all the things by myself. I didn't have any help. So I get back home, so sometimes very sad and depressed. And I remember I had one class last year in 2019, and I met Dr. Joy on campus, and she just embraced me and spoke to me. And then she connected me to 3 wonderful colleagues in my department. And from that point, everything just changed for me in the department. Like they all got, you know, the three colleagues that was introduced to me connected so well with me that even when I was going through some challenges last year because of this pandemic, those 3 were the people that were checking on me. When I was hospitalized, those were the people that came to, came to visit and came to, give me the support that I needed. So I can imagine if there was no peer pairing with these people. So peer pairing, even virtually, can help, and it can be on campus and it can be virtual. It can be virtual. I have like a group of 5 people together checking on each other is so important. I was greatly affected by this pandemic last year, and I can tell you it was because of that peer pairing, the people that were in my group that gave me the support that I needed. So I think it's one of the things, peer pairing is so good because a lot of international students feel so left out in the system, especially in the mental health counseling that we're doing. We don't have a lot of Black people. We don't have a lot of international people in the mental health counseling. So it is so difficult for you to be alone in class. And then you're talking to yourself like, am I communicating? Am I doing the right thing or not? So peer pairing, I think, is one of the things that I feel can really, really help us as we continue in this journey, helping others and, doing our schoolwork. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in real quickly. You don't know this person, but I run into one of those people that you were paired with, and they were bragging about the food that you gave them. And so it goes both ways. Here you are, you're here sharing that you got something from them, and then you had invited them over and you blessed them with food. And so they needed that as well. So thank you also for being willing to reach out to them. Any other comments from anyone or questions? Thank you so much for the participation. It's helped also challenge and grow us as well. Any final remarks?
I don't see anything popping in on the chat, but we appreciate you guys presenting. Dr. Joy, I've been in a couple of your sessions, so I was really happy to be here with you guys and learn. And we really appreciate that insight and the personal stories that you share and that vulnerability. So thank you for your time and engaging with everyone.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for hosting us. And thanks everybody for attending. And we'll be in touch later, maybe at another conference post pandemic or even online. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.